Hello class. So today we're going to talk about C++. I know we've been waiting for that, so kind of excited to get rolling with it. There's major differences between C++, Visual Basic, and C Sharp. And so I'll go over some of those differences as we get started, but let's get started with making a console application. One of the things I want to talk about real quick about that is that for teaching the programming principles, I'm going to be using the console applications the most. We will, of course, and I will assign Windows application forms to be built with text boxes and buttons and that type of thing. But for teaching, I'm going to probably use the console most of the time just because it's simpler to teach principles. Okay, having said that, let's go through the process. If you've been following the Visual Basic stuff, it's the same process. We go to New and Project, and I'm already set up here, so C++. I want a Windows application. Let's go ahead and name this Hello World. Now I'm just going to go ahead and name it C++ because I want to keep track of this. Say OK. I don't want a GitHub repository. We're fine without that. Maybe we'll leave it. Okay. And once you've created your first console app, it's going to come up like this. It basically will start off with your Hello World, and I'll go over a few of these things. The first thing to know is, unlike Visual Studio, we're going to have this hashtag include, and we're going to have these pre-processing items that have to run. And I'll talk about those here in a second. Another thing you're going to notice is that it starts up with the main. So every console app is going to start up with a main method here that has to exist. You're going to notice this std : cout. I know that looks very much different from what we're used to, and it gives you a few instructions to run the program control plus F for debugging, and that's to start without debugging. We're going to be using that one quite a bit, and then to debug just F5. But the control F5 will stop the console so it doesn't just close, which I like closing it, and I'll show you why in a little bit. And then some tips for getting started here. The first thing I'll do is I like to just delete all this because I don't want this in my application. And we can leave this part because that's all true. One of the things I like to do when I get to this point is I like to go to the Tools and Options, and you come down here to Debugging, and then slide down to General, and then scroll all the way to the bottom. You'll see this automatically close the console. I like to make sure that that's checked, and that's something you need to do when you first set this up. After that, you won't need to do it again, but it helps when you're working with your console. Okay. So another thing you're going to notice is up on top, you'll see these two forward slashes here. And in C++, what this means is that whatever follows these two forward slashes is going to be ignored by the compiler. And this is how we comment a line of code. We comment it two forward slashes, and then we write whatever we want, and we know the compiler is going to ignore that. So, for example, you could put your name, and if you have an assignment, the name of your assignment. Now, let's say you have a whole block of code that you wanted to comment out. Well, all it is a forward slash asterisk, and then whatever's in here is whatever's between these two asterisks is going to be ignored by the compiler. So if you want to block out a line of a block of code for debugging, that's usually when that comes in here. Also, looking at the code, another thing you're going to notice is that we have these hashtag includes, and so these are what they call pre-processing code that we use to tell the compiler that we're going to be using some type of reference or a library. And so include IOStream. This one right here is the most important because this tells us that we're going to be using the cout or console out to output information or input information. So it's really important. The next thing I want to explain is the shortcut control keys. So when you want to run these, when you want to compile this code and output something, you can hit your F5, and that will it'll actually compile. And you saw that it flashed and it closed the console screen right away. So to do it without it stopping, or I mean to stop it without debugging, you just hit Control F5, and then that'll run your code, and you'll get your output. So hello world. And the next thing we're going to want to do, okay, so let's kill this, is we're going to want to use, type in another little piece of code here called using namespace std semicolon. In C++, we have to put semicolons after every line of code. And so what this will allow us to do is to get rid of this part here, and then we can run our code without it. And we get our same output, no problem. So jumping right in, what we're going to want to do is let's start throwing some variables in there and having a little bit of fun. So we start with the data type, but we're going to use an int, and let's just declare a variable x, and we'll set it to 5, and let's do another one, int y equals, I don't know, 6. Oh, and we're forgetting our semicolons, so let's get back to that. Okay, and so this is how you declare variables: data type, and then the variable name, and then assign it to something. And this is how we do that part, and we're gonna have a little bit of fun with it. So I want to explain a little bit what's going on in the computer right here. So first of all, let's unassign them and go back to just this part here. What's happening right here is when we initialize these variables is we're telling the system to allocate memory to this what's going to be this variable, and so we're allocating memory, and we're going to name it X. We're allocating memory for Y, and we're going to name it Y, and also and so forth. And then we could still initialize the variables up above, but just for, like I said, for training purposes and to keep things clean, we'll do it down here. So we'll do this part here. So here we allocated the memory, and here we're saying, okay, in memory X, we are going to put into memory the value 5. Here we're going to place into memory Y the value 6. Here we're going to place into memory Z the value 0. Next, we're going to go ahead and we're going to process something. So let's go ahead and set Z, and we'll use a product. Now, what I want to emphasize here is that this part here is known is the process part. This is where we're going to evaluate this memory Z, and we're going to assign it whatever we evaluated on this side. So the computer always evaluates from left to right, just in the same manner that we read. And I know that can be a little bit confusing because, you know, in algebra we would say x times y equals z or something along those lines. Well, in this case, the system is always saying, okay, x is assigned 5, y is assigned 6, z is assigned 0. Here, 0 is the memory slot z is going to be assigned whatever the evaluation on the right side is. And so the right side of this equal sign is what's being evaluated, and then this product is being assigned to the memory spot Z. Now let's go ahead and we'll change our world thing here to something else. We're going to put something that makes sense. Product. I don't know, just product. And so that's a string. Inside of those quotations is a string, and we're going to concatenate that with Z. So now we have Z, and let's go ahead and make that a string. Actually, that'll work right there, I think. Okay, so let's concatenate this, Control F5. And I have to remember that I'm working back in C++, so the syntax is a little bit different, and we need to do that. Okay, so this is going to output this product, this string product, and then it's going to output Z. So now if we do Control F5, you'll see that it says product 30. And that is the answer there. To make this a little bit nicer, let's do one more thing. Usually at the end of each one of these lines, you want to do this this little piece of code called end L, and that will just means end the line. And so if we did that again, it'll be a little bit cleaner. Oops. Okay, so there we go. Product 30. Press the key to continue, and that's what you want to do right there. Next, I want to talk about some of the symbology that you're going to see in C++. And these are common in most of your higher level object-oriented programming languages. So the first one is your, I'll do this in a commented out section, is a this symbol here, excuse me. And well, that means less than or equal than. So we can use that when, like right in here when we're assigning stuff. The next one is this one here, which means not equal to. And this one here, which is a comparison one. This means that the value on the left is being compared to the value on the right. Not set to it, not assigned to it, but compared to it. So there is a difference. And then this one here, which means greater than or equal to. The next thing I want to talk about are the variables, the different type of variables that we use. And there's a whole bunch of them, but the ones that we'll mostly be using are, of course, an int that stands for an integer, a float, double, char, a constant, and that about sums it up right there. These are the ones we're mostly be using, especially in this intro class. And I'll go over those. Go over these data types here, and these variables, and talk about the memory storage. So an int takes up 4 bytes. A float also takes up 4 bytes, and a char takes 1 byte. And I wanted to say that because and a double also takes 8 bytes. But I wanted to go over that because the amount of memory that you use is important. If you don't need to use so much memory, then of course you're going to want to use less. For example, if you're working with a lot of numbers or large numbers, I'm sorry, then you're going to want to use a long data type, but that's 8 bytes. That's a lot of memory. There's no reason to use that if you don't need it. A lot of times if you're running a testing variable, you don't want to set it to 4 bytes. There's no reason to do that. So don't use an int and use 4 bytes. Just use a bool, and that's only 1 byte. If you're looking at letters and let's say like the grading thing, and you have A, B, C, D, it's a single digit, then there's no reason to use a longer variable type. We can use a char and just use 1 byte of memory. So we're always thinking to trying to be conservative in our programming. I want to talk about incrementing, and we can increment the old-fashioned way where x equal x plus 1. Let's set 0 or z equal to x. And I just can't touch it. And we better use our semicolons, which I continue to forget. And let's run that. And of course, it's going to come out the way that you're thinking it's going to come out, 6. Now, one of the shorthands for incrementing to simply add is to say, okay, well, let's do this. X, and we can get away from that. And now let's run this and see what happens. And it's 6. So this right here, this line here, line 24, is the shorthand code for x equal x plus 1. It is literally the same as saying x equal x plus 1. All right. So just as we can increment by 1 using this shorthand, we can also decrement by 1. So we can do this. And this is going to be the same as this. So let's run this and see what happens. And it's 4. Just as we, it's 5. 5 minus 1 is 4. So we decremented by 1. This is something that you would use if you were iterating through a loop and you needed to keep track of your iterations. Okay, now messing around with our little example here, there's a couple more things that I want to introduce you to, and some more shorthand. So here we're initializing our variables, setting our memory spaces to X, Y, Z, and there's a couple of cool little things we can do that's more efficient, and that's this. We can put a comma and say Y, comma, Z. Let's fix that properly. And this means the same, as long as they're the same data type. So this means integer X, integer Y, integer Z, each one of them setting in a memory spot for each one of them, and naming them memory allocation X, Y, and Z. And so that's just a nice little shorthand. This is usually the way that most programmers would do this. Another thing to know is usually at the end over here, we should have a return. And we usually set that to 0, and that's it. So like if we were to run this, our code would still work, and we'd still get our output of 4, which is the X decremented, and all is well. So now we're going to have a little bit of fun with our code and practice a few things. So let's I'm going to rewrite some code here, and I'll explain things as I move along. So first thing I want is I'm just going to make up some variables and mix up some data types. If I can spell. Okay, so I created 3 data types: int num, double weight, string name, and let's get rid of all this because we're not going to use any of this. And then let's do cout. This is console out, and we're going to output to the console a message. And let's just say int and semicolon. Console in, so we're going to be taking in something, a number, and cout, and line. All right, and let's and what this does is the first line here, this cout, sends out a message. Enter an int. Okay, well let's enter an int and say 4. Hit enter. Press enter key to return. So all it did was it said enter an int, and then it says int num, and so I entered 4, and what it did is it took the number 4 that I entered here, and it assigned it to the variable int num. That's what happened on this line of code on line 21. All right, let's continue. And we can display this actually a little bit easier. So I'm going to output a string, and then I want to output of course it helps to do things correctly. Gotta get back into my C++ mode. let's see here. Okay, let's get rid of this right here. It's not necessary. There we go. Okay, so line 24 right here. What's happening is we're outputting to the console the string num, which is I'm hard coding. This is a hard coded string. I'm just saying this is going to be num. And I'm outputting the variable num, so whatever was entered, and then I'm ending the line. So output the string num, output the variable num, end the line. Let's see what happens. Entered int. Okay, let's do 5 this time. And we have our output. And it's literally what we said. The string num is here, num, and then the variable num, what we'd entered, what we'd assigned the value to, 5, and then it ended the line. All right, let's keep going. Okay, let's do another one. Let's just say name. And remember, whenever you want the console to take information in, you have to do cin and then those two greater signs together. And this time what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, enter the name, and name is going to be the variable string up here. And that's what's going on there. Okay. And I want to go over one thing. You see this little error thing that came up here, and it tells us if we hover the cursor over it, it'll tell us what the error is. And we're missing this string right here. And so even though I declared a variable string, I didn't tell the system that we would be using strings. So I have to go back up, and I need to tell the system that we're going to be using strings. So let's go ahead and do that. And now everything is good. System is happy. Okay, let's keep going here. The system will almost always tell you if you're messing up. So just keep an eye on things and you'll be fine. What did I? It's okay. Right. And I'll go over all this here in a moment. All right. So what do we do here? We enter some integer. We're going to output the integer. This is just an example. And then here we're just, okay, let's enter our name. And we have the string name. And then we take in the variable name, which we assigned up here. And we say, okay, let's output, let's end the line. Now enter your weight. And then it's going to take this weight, whatever you enter, it's going to assign it to the variable weight that we had up here. Going to end the line. Then down here, it's going to output the name and output the weight. So let's see what happens. All right, so this comes up, says give me a variable. Let's do 1. It says enter my name. Okay, let's do that. Enter my weight. Okay, 148. Enter. Name is Bobby. My weight's 148. Press any key to continue. And so this is how we do things to get data into the system using the console app. Let's clean this up a little bit. And and to do some work. So you could see that this could easily be, we could be easily be entering numbers and then processing those numbers to do some type of calculation or something else. So it's really, really cool. This concludes the first lecture of C++. We went over the IO stream, which allows us to do our talk to the console, console in, console out. We went over the include string, which you must have in order to use strings, like we did here for the name when we use this variable type string. We went over the different data types like int and a double, a string, a char, a boolean value, and so we had a little bit of fun, and we went over some shortcuts for incrementing and decrementing, and also for how to declare your ints or your data types. So I hope you enjoyed that, and happy coding.